In 1957, a brother and sister opened a record label in the back of a converted movie theater in Memphis, Tennessee. By 1967, they were the second biggest soul label in America. By 1975, federal marshals walked through the front door, ordered everyone out, and seized the building. The artists who built Stax Records never got paid. Not properly, not fully, not fairly. This is why. Number 10, Gee Whiz. Look at his eyes. Carla Thomas, 1960-1961. She was 16 years old when she wrote it. 16, sitting in class at Hamilton High School in Memphis. A girl named Carla Thomas wrote a love song in her notebook during downtime between lessons. Her father was Rufus Thomas, a DJ, entertainer, and one of the most beloved voices in Memphis. He brought her into the studio, and that schoolgirl love song became Stax Records' very first national hit. Gee Whiz reached number 5 on the R&B chart and number 10 on the pop chart in 1961. But here's what that success actually meant for Stax. Jerry Wexler at Atlantic Records heard it and offered Jim Stewart a deal. Atlantic would distribute Stax Records nationally. Truth, in exchange for a contract clause that gave Atlantic ownership of every master recording they distributed. Jim Stewart signed it. He didn't fully understand what he was agreeing to. Carla Thomas, a 16-year-old girl from the Memphis projects, had written the song that launched Stax Records and inadvertently set in motion the contract that would destroy it 15 years later. When Stax ended their Atlantic deal in 1968, Atlantic kept the masters. The entire Stax catalog from 1961 to 1968, every Otis Redding record, every Carla Thomas record, every Sam and Dave record, gone, owned by Atlantic, not by the artists who made them, not by the label that recorded them. All I can say. Carla Thomas told Memphis Magazine decades later that her tuition at Tennessee State University had been paid by her songwriting royalties from Gee Whiz. That money was real. But the catalog, the masters, earnings from a song a 16-year-old wrote in her classroom, those belonged to someone else. The Queen of Memphis Soul handed Stax its first hit, and the contract that hit generated eventually took everything away. Number 9, Soul Finger, The Bar Case, 1967. In the summer of 1967, 5 teenage boys from South Memphis walked into Stax Records and played an original instrumental for anyone who would listen. They called it Soul Finger. David Porter and Isaac Hayes heard it and told the kids to record it immediately. To create that party atmosphere on tape, Porter and Hayes invited neighborhood children who had been hanging around outside the studio, paid them each a bottle of Coca-Cola, and told them to shout Soul Finger into the microphone. That recording, children shouting the title for bottles of soda, cracked the top 20 on the Billboard Hot 100. The Bar Kays were 17 years old. Otis Redding heard them perform. He wanted them as his touring band, and because the plane could only hold so many people, bassist James Alexander boarded a commercial flight while the rest of his bandmates flew with Redding. On December 10, 1967, Otis Redding's plane crashed into Lake Monona in the icy waters outside Madison, Wisconsin. Redding was 26 years old. 4 Barkays, Ronnie Caldwell, Fallon Jones, Carl Cunningham, and Jimmy King were killed. Trumpeter Ben Cawley was the sole survivor of the crash. He couldn't swim. James Alexander, the one who took the commercial flight, arrived in Wisconsin and at 17 years old had the task of identifying the bodies of his bandmates. He and Ben Cawley rebuilt the Barkays from scratch. They kept recording. They kept going. When Stax collapsed in 1975, the survivors of that crash, who had given the label years of their lives, were left with nothing. James Alexander Avenue in South Memphis now bears his name 1 block from where Stax Records used to stand. The building was demolished. Listen, 90% of you watching these videos right now ain't subscribed yet. If these stories are blowing your mind, imagine what you're missing. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and join the R&B fans who never miss a Groove Lens upload. Number 8, Who's Making Love? Johnnie Taylor, 1968. You better think about it twice. In 1960, a gospel group called the Soul Stirrers needed a new lead singer. Their previous lead had just gone solo. His name was Sam Cooke. Johnnie Taylor stepped into Sam Cooke's spot in the Soul Stirrers. That is the level of voice we are talking about. When Taylor signed to Stax in 1966, the label didn't quite know what to do with him. They marketed him as a blues singer, which made no sense for a man with Cooke-level gospel refinement. And then in September 1968, Who's Making Love changed everything. Written by 4 Stax staff writers, Homer Banks, B.T. Crutcher, Don Davis, and Raymond Jackson. The song was recorded with the Stax House Band and Isaac Hayes on keyboards. It hit number 1 on the R&B chart, number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. It sold 1 million copies, and it arrived at the worst possible moment for Stax. The label had just lost its entire back catalog to Atlantic Records. The man who had replaced Sam Cooke was now the most important artist at a label that was rebuilding itself from zero. Taylor became Stax's all-time best-selling artist across his career there. And when Stax collapsed in 1975, Johnnie Taylor's royalties disappeared into the bankruptcy proceedings along with everyone else's. He moved to Columbia Records, and in 1976, Disco Lady went to number 1, first single ever to be certified platinum under the new RIA certification rules. Johnnie Taylor, the man who stepped into Sam Cooke's shoes, carried Stax on his back for 7 years and had to start over from zero when the building was seized. Number 7, sitting on the dock of the bay, Otis Redding, 1968. Otis Redding had just had a throat operation. He was worried he might not be able to sing the same way again. So in August 1967, while staying on a rented houseboat in Sausalito, California, he started sketching something quieter, something more. Still, he had been listening to the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper on repeat for weeks. And I headed for the Frisco Bay. He wanted to make something like that. He finished the song with guitarist Steve Cropper in the Memphis studio in December 1967. 3 days later, his plane crashed into Lake Monona, Wisconsin. Otis Redding was 26 years old. On the dock of the bay, watching the tide. He was in the front of the plane, strapped into the co-pilot's seat. He never whistled properly in the studio. Steve Cropper later said Otis was trying to mimic seagulls, but sounded like a crow. Roll away again. I'm just sitting. The whistling at the end of the record was always meant to be a placeholder. A placeholder became one of the most recognizable sounds in American music history. Watching the tide roll away. Sitting On. The Dock of the Bay was released less than a month after Otis died. It became the first posthumous #1 single in the history of the Billboard Hot 100. Dock of the Bay, I'm wasting time. It won Otis Redding 2 posthumous Grammy Awards, and his estate, his family, watched the royalties flow into a label that was heading straight for bankruptcy. This won't leave me alone. When Stax collapsed in 1975, the Redding family's ability to collect properly on the song that had defined American soul music was tangled in the chaos of bankruptcy proceedings and the Atlantic catalog dispute. Everything seems to stay the same. Stax had Otis. Otis made Stax, and when Stax fell, the man who built it wasn't alive to fight for what he was owed. Number 6, Hold On. I'm Common, Sam and Dave, 1966. Dave Prater was in the bathroom. Isaac Hayes was growing impatient. Hold on, David Porter reportedly called through the door. I'm coming. Hayes looked at Porter. That's the song. They had it finished in under an hour. Hold On, I'm Coming spent 20 weeks on the R&B charts and hit #1 in 1966. The song was written by Hayes and Porter for a duo that wasn't even signed to Stax. Sam Moore and Dave Prater were on Atlantic Records. Jerry Wexler at Atlantic thought they'd be better suited for the Memphis studio, so he leased them to Stax. Sam and Dave were known as Double Dynamite. During the Stax Volt Review European Tour of 1967, they nearly upstaged Otis Redding. Rolling Stone's Robert Gordon later wrote, and this is a direct quote, "They were double dynamite, each at full tilt, exploding together with exponential force." 7 consecutive top 10 R&B singles, a Grammy for Soul Man in 1968. And because Sam and Dave were leased from Atlantic, when Axe and Atlantic parted ways, the duo went with Atlantic. Their records stayed with Atlantic. Their royalties went to Atlantic, and because they were a leased act, never fully Stax's artists to begin with, they fell into a gap that nobody covered. Sam Moore told Variety decades later about the chaos of their early career, label after label, bad deals, racial barriers, knocking on Morris Levy's door in Miami. The two men barely spoke off stage for most of their career. Dave Prater died in a car crash in 1988. Sam Moore died in January 2025 at age 89. He remembered all of it. Number 5, I'll Take You There, the Staple Singers, 1972. Al Bell wrote, I'll Take You There in his father's backyard. His little brother had just been shot and killed. Bell sat on the hood of an old school bus that wasn't running anymore and heard the song form in his head. I know a place, ain't nobody worried, ain't nobody crying. He took it to the Staple Singers at Muscle Shoals. Mavis Staples struggled at first with the rhythm. It was built around a Jamaican reggae record Bell had brought in as a reference. Let me take you there. I'll take you there. Oh. The band thought it was a demo Bell had made. They didn't find out until years later that they had modeled the groove on someone else's song. I'll Take You There went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Let me take you there. In 1972, it spent 15 weeks on the charts, and Al Bell, the man who wrote it for his dead brother, was also running Stax Records. He was trying to keep the label alive. Play your piano now. He had just released 27 albums in a single year to rebuild Stax's catalog after the Atlantic deal stripped it bare. He had partnered with CBS for national distribution. CBS then strangled that distribution intentionally, allegedly to protect their own artists from Stax competition. During the bankruptcy proceedings, Bell was indicted on bank fraud charges. He was acquitted, but the label was gone. And the Staple Singers, a gospel family whose patriarch Pop Staples had once told Martin Luther King Jr., "If you can preach it, we can sing it," were left navigating a bankruptcy for songs they had poured their souls into. Number 4, Theme from Shaft, Isaac Hayes, 1971. Isaac Hayes wanted to star in the movie. He agreed to compose the score for Shaft because director Gordon Parks had promised him a shot at the title role. Hayes had no idea Richard Roundtree had already been cast. So he composed the score anyway, walked into MGM's recording studio, heard the 3-track system they were using, and walked back out. He went back to Stax Studios in Memphis and re-recorded every piece of music to ensure the commercial album had the depth he wanted. The result was the first double album of original studio material ever released by an R&B artist. It hit number 1 on the Billboard 200. Theme from Shaft hit number 1 on the Hot 100. At the 1972 Academy Awards, Isaac Hayes became the first black composer to win an Oscar for Best Original Song. He dedicated it to his grandmother. He was the 3rd black person in history, after Hattie McDaniel and Sidney Poitier, to win a competitive Oscar in any category. And then Stax collapsed. By 1975, Isaac Hayes had sued Stax for non-payment of royalties. That lawsuit was one of the filings that helped push the label into involuntary bankruptcy. By 1976, Hayes and his wife declared personal bankruptcy. Man that would risk his neck for his brother, man. By the end of 1977, he had lost his home, most of his personal property, and the rights to all future royalties from music he had written, performed, and produced. Right on. The man who won an Oscar, who made the best-selling album in Stax history, Lost Everything.
Won't come out when message all about.
He rebuilt through acting. South Park, Escape from New York, Robin Hood, Men in Tights. Isaac Hayes died on August 10, 2008. He was 65 years old. He had done the impossible twice, once building the empire and once surviving its collapse. Number 3, Woman to Woman, Shirley Brown, 1974, 13 years.
I want to know if Barbara's here tonight.
Shirley Brown spent 13 years on the road with blues guitarist Albert King, opening his shows, singing to crowds who hadn't come to see her.
Yes, may I speak to Barbara? Is that you, girl?
King discovered her at 14 years old at the Harlem Club in Brooklyn, Illinois. Some said her voice was like Aretha Franklin's powerful, raw, built-in church.
I'm calling you tonight. You see, I was going through my own.
In 1974, King recommended her to Stax. She walked in, and her very first Stax single became the label's last major hit. Woman to Woman was written for Inez Fox. Fox turned it down.
He's mine from the top of his head.
Shirley Brown took it and in a single take improvised the spoken opening. Barbara, this is Shirley, a phone call between two women, one asking the other to give her man back. It was dignified, devastating, completely unlike anything on radio.
How much I love that man.
The song spent 2 weeks at number 1 on the R&B chart in November 1974. It crossed to number 22 pop. It sold more than 1 million copies in its first 8 weeks. It earned a Grammy nomination, and it was released on Truth Records. A Stax imprint specifically set up to bypass the CBS distribution deal because Stax needed to keep the revenue from this record for themselves. The label was already burning. Shirley Brown was the last heat.
Woman to woman.
Stax's co-producer on her album was Al Jackson Jr., the drummer from Booker T and the MGs. Before the year was out, Al Jackson Jr. was shot and killed in his own home in Memphis. He was 39 years old, and by the end of 1975, Stax was bankrupt. Shirley Brown never got what that million-selling record was worth.
See where I'm coming from. And
Number 2, Knock on Wood, Eddie Floyd, 1966. Eddie Floyd was supposed to give Knock on Wood to Otis Redding. Let that sit. He had written it with Steve Cropper specifically for Otis, and Otis was unavailable when the session came together. So Eddie Floyd sang it himself.
The way you love me is frightening.
Knock on Wood reached number 28 on the Hot 100 and number 1 on the R&B chart in 1966.
It's better.
The song was inspired, according to Floyd himself, by a thunderstorm that rolled through Memphis while he and Steve Cropper were writing in the studio. When lightning flashed outside the window,
I can't take no chance.
Floyd said something about knocking on wood for protection. Cropper said, "That's the song." The same way, Hold On, I'm Common was born in David Porter's bathroom visit. Stax was a label where genius happened by accident. In the room, in the moment between people who trusted each other completely. Knock on Wood has been covered by David Bowie, by Ami Stewart, whose disco version hit number 1 in 1979, by hundreds of artists worldwide. It generated royalties for decades. But Eddie Floyd was on Stax, and Stax's contract structure meant that staff writers and artists were often on
You know it means so much.
Flat rates and recoupment deals that left them with little of what those covers generated. When Stax collapsed in 1975, Floyd found himself navigating bankruptcy proceedings alongside every other artist at the label.
Better than any.
He later said in interviews that the collapse of Stax was like losing a family, not just a label, a family. We all lived in those rooms together, he told journalists. We made those records together. And then one day, the federal marshals came and it was over. Number 1, Green Onions, Booker T and the MGs, 1962. Nobody planned Green Onions. The Bar Keys had a session booked at Stax in the fall of 1962. They were running late, so the house musicians started jamming to warm up. Organist Booker T. Jones was 17 years old. He started playing a chord progression on the Hammond organ. Steve Cropper came in on guitar, Louis Steinberg on bass, Al Jackson Jr. on drums. They played it once, looked at each other, played it again, and then Jim Stewart walked in, stopped in the doorway, and said, "Record that." They recorded Green Onions in a single take. It reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 1 on the R&B chart. It became one of the most recognizable instrumentals in American music history. It has been licensed in hundreds of films, advertisements, and television shows. American Graffiti, Animal House, The Big Chill, it plays everywhere. And here is what Booker T. Jones later said about what they were paid for it. He described the session as standard Stax work. Show up, play the music, go home. The session musicians, who were staff players, received no back-end royalties on recordings in the early Stax years, just flat session fees. The license income from Green Onions alone, across decades of film and television placements, has been extraordinary. But the people who played it in one unrehearsed take because they were killing time, waiting for another band, received a fraction of what that song ultimately generated. Booker T. Jones left Stax in 1969, partly over creative and financial disagreements. When Stax collapsed in 1975, the label's bankruptcy consumed the publishing catalog that held Green Onions. The federal marshals who seized the building in December 1975 walked past every room where those songs were made. That converted movie theater in Memphis, where 17-year-old Booker T. Jones accidentally created an immortal piece of music, was later demolished. In 2003, the Stax Museum of American Soul Music was built on the exact same site. They rebuilt the studio inside it, down to the original tile in the bathroom where the reverb sound came from. But you can't rebuild what those artists were owed. That was gone with the building.